The reservation was made under my daughter's name. I only found out because Maria at the front desk, sweet girl, been with us 11 years, called me from the host stand, her voice low and careful the way it gets when something isn't right. "Mr. Daniel Hargrove," she said, "your family has a party of 7 booked for Saturday at 7. They asked specifically for the private dining room." A pause. "You're not on the reservation." I sat with that for a moment. 7 people. My daughter Renata, her husband Glenn, my son Patrick, his wife Jody, my grandchildren, 3 of them old enough to sit through a dinner, and my sister Elena, who I hadn't spoken to properly in 2 years because she'd decided, along with my children, that I was getting difficult in my old age. 7 people in my restaurant for what I could only assume was a family occasion. Without me. "Thank you, Maria," I said. "Please don't mention that you called." I hung up the phone and looked around my office, the small one behind the kitchen, the one with the framed review from 1987 on the wall, the year I opened Hargrove's when I was 32 years old and had exactly $4,000 to my name, and a recipe for lamb shoulder that my mother had pressed into my hands like a secret. 38 years of photographs, of birthday dinners and anniversary suppers, and the long, slow education of my children in what it meant to build something real. And they'd booked my private room without telling me. I already knew what Saturday was. Let me tell you about Daniel Hargrove, so you understand what was at stake. I grew up in a row house in Baltimore with a mother who cooked like it was prayer, and a father who left before I was old enough to remember his face. We were not rich. We were not comfortable. We were the kind of family that stretches a chicken across 4 days and calls it abundance. My mother, God rest her, believed that a table was the most sacred thing a family could gather around. Not a church pew, not a living room sofa, but a table with food on it, with steam rising, with everybody's elbows too close together. I carried that with me to Philadelphia when I was 26, working in restaurant kitchens, learning the business from the floor up. Dishwasher, prep cook, line cook, sous chef. I watched owners make mistakes and I filed every one of them away. When I opened Hargrove's on Locust Street in the fall of 1987, I had no investors, no safety net, and no backup plan. Just the lamb shoulder recipe, a signed lease, and the absolute conviction that my mother had been right, that feeding people well was one of the few genuinely holy things a person could do. Restaurant survived, more than survived. Hargrove's became the kind of place people saved up for, booked months in advance, brought their children to when they wanted to show them what a real meal tasted like. We won awards I never expected. We lost chefs I loved to bigger stages and hired new ones and loved them too. I married Sandra in 1989 in the dining room after closing, the tables pushed back, and we raised Renata and Patrick in that building as much as in our home. They did homework in my office. They ate staff meals at the kitchen counter. They learned the names of every supplier, every sommelier, every busboy who came through our doors. Sandra died in 2019, pancreatic cancer, which is to say, quickly and without mercy. She was 61. After that, I'll admit, things changed. I became, and I'm using my children's word here, difficult. What they meant was that I grieved. What they meant was that I went quiet in ways they didn't know how to manage. What they meant was that I stopped coming to Sunday dinners as reliably as I once had, and when I did come, I sometimes sat through the whole meal without saying much, and when I did speak, I said things that made people uncomfortable, true things mostly, about time and loss, and the fact that none of us were taking seriously enough how short everything was. They wanted me to see someone, a therapist. I went twice and found it useful in the way that doing push-ups is useful, good for you, just not something I was going to make a lifestyle of. They wanted me to move on, which is a phrase that has always struck me as something said by people who haven't yet lost the thing they'd built their whole life around. What they did not want, apparently, was for me to keep running my restaurant the way I'd always run it. There had been conversations, or rather there had been one conversation, Thanksgiving 2 years ago, after which things were never quite the same. Patrick had suggested, gently, that maybe I should think about stepping back, bring in a managing partner, let the next generation take a more active role. I had said, less gently, that the next generation had never expressed any interest in the restaurant until it started making serious money, and that I had not spent 38 years building something in order to hand it to people who thought brunch service was an innovation. Elena had agreed with Patrick. Renata had stayed quiet in the way she does when she agrees with someone, but doesn't want to be on record. Glenn and Jody had looked at their plates. And that was that. For 2 years we had operated in a kind of armed politeness, holiday appearances, birthday texts, the performance of a family without its actual substance. I had thrown myself back into the restaurant, new menu, renovated bar program, a young chef named Cosima who had more talent in her left hand than most people develop in a career, Hargroves had its best 2 years of revenue since the early 2000s. None of my children had commented on this. And now it was Thursday, 2 days before Saturday, and they had booked my private dining room, my table, my room, the one Sandra and I had christened with a bottle of 1988 Barolo and 2 plates of that lamb shoulder, for a party of 7 that did not include me. Saturday, I should tell you, was my 70th birthday. I spent Thursday night and Friday doing something my children had always accused me of. I took my time. I did not call Renata. I did not text Patrick. I did not ask Alina to explain herself, though I had 17 years of her phone number memorized and could have dialed it without thinking. Instead, I called Cosima into my office on Friday afternoon and told her that I would be joining the party in the private room on Saturday evening and that I wanted her to prepare a specific menu. I told her what I wanted. She looked at me for a long moment. She has her mother's eyes, dark and steady, the kind that don't flinch, and then she nodded and said, "I'll need the lamb order moved up." "I know," I said. "I already called Vicent." She almost smiled. Should I be worried about Saturday night? "Nobody's getting hurt," I said. "I just want it to be memorable." I spent Friday evening in the dining room after close. At the corner table where Sandra and I used to sit when we wanted to talk without being overheard by the kitchen. I had a glass of the Barolo. We still carried it, a different vintage now, but from the same estate, and I looked at the room. The warm lighting, the walls with their decades of small renovations, the particular way the candlelight caught the glassware on a clean table. I thought about my mother pressing that recipe into my hands. I thought about Sandra and her wedding dress between 2 pushed-back tables. I thought about Renata at age 9, solemnly informing a supplier that her father wasn't available but she could take a message. I thought about Patrick at 14, washing dishes without being asked because he could see the kitchen was in the weeds, and how I'd looked at him across that steaming sink and felt something so large I hadn't had a word for it. I finished my wine. I went home and slept well. Saturday evening, I arrived at Hargroves at 5 o'clock, 2 hours before the reservation, and I did what I always do. I walked the room, checked the tables, tasted the bisque Cosima had prepared for the evening's first course, spoke to the floor staff, confirmed the wine selections with our sommelier, a careful young man named Theo who had been with us 3 years and whose palate I trusted completely. At 6:30, I changed into my good suit in my office. Dark charcoal, white shirt, the tie Sandra had given me for my 60th birthday, burgundy silk, which she said matched the Barolo and my personality. At 6:50, Maria appeared at my office door. "They're here," she said. All seven. All 7. Give them 10 minutes to get settled, then come and get me." She nodded and disappeared. I sat in my office and listened to the sounds of my kitchen, the particular percussion of a Saturday service in full swing, the call and response of Cosima and her line, the occasional burst of heat and noise when the pass window opened, the sounds I had been hearing for 38 years, the sounds that meant everything was working the way it was supposed to. Maria came back in 9 minutes. I followed her down the hallway to the private dining room. The door was heavy oak. I could hear voices on the other side, Renata's laugh, which she got from Sandra, and Patrick's lower register, and the higher notes of the grandchildren. Normal sounds, happy sounds, a family at dinner. I opened the door. The room went quiet so completely that I could hear the candles. They were all there, Renata and Glenn, Patrick and Jody, Alina and the 3 grandchildren, Marcus, who was 13, and the twins Sophie and Bea, who were 9. A birthday cake, I noticed, sat on the sideboard, half hidden under cloth. There were balloons, deep red ones, the color of the restaurant. "My color, our color." "Dad," Patrick said. He was half out of his chair. "Grandpa," that was Marcus, whose voice had recently started its uncertain journey towards something deeper. I looked around the table slowly. I had spent 2 days deciding what kind of man I wanted to be in this moment, and I had arrived at an answer. "You booked the private room," I said, without telling me. Renata stood up. She was 40 and she looked at that moment, about 14, the same expression she'd worn the time she'd broken the small mirror in my office and tried to rearrange the pieces so I wouldn't notice. "Dad, we wanted to surprise." "I know you did," I said. "I know." I walked to the head of the table, my table, the chair I had sat in for 38 years of private dinners, and I pulled it out and I sat down. "I also know," I said, "that for the last 2 years you have all treated me as if grief were a condition requiring management rather than a process requiring patience. I know that you have discussed among yourselves what to do about me and that these discussions have not included me. I know that my sister," I looked at Alina, who had the grace to look directly back at me, agreed at Thanksgiving that I should step back from the restaurant, and that none of you said a word when Hargroves had its 2 best years in recent memory. The room was very quiet. I have thought about what I want to say to you all, I continued. I've had 2 days to think about it. I am 70 years old today, which is enough time to know the difference between anger and grief, and enough time to know that I have been carrying both and sometimes mixing them up. I looked at Patrick. You were trying to protect me, I understand that. Your mother was the person I talked to about everything, and when she was gone, I didn't know how to talk to any of you the same way, and I let that go on too long. Patrick's jaw was tight in the way it gets when he's trying not to cry. But I need you to hear this, I said. This restaurant is not a burden I'm being crushed under. This restaurant is how I stay close to your mother. It is the thing she and I built together, and when I am in this room, I am with her. I do not want to be managed away from that. I want to be asked how I'm doing, asked what I need, asked to sit at the table. I paused. I can sit at the table, you understand. I just need someone to tell me where the table is. Elena made a sound I hadn't heard from her in 2 years. She stood up, and she was across the room before I'd finished registering that she'd moved. And then she had her arms around me from behind in the way she used to when we were children, and she was trying to make something better and didn't have the words. I'm sorry, Daniel, she said. I'm sorry. We were so worried about you and we made it about us. Renata was crying openly now, Sandra's laugh replaced by Sandra's tears, and Glenn had his arm around her with the careful tenderness of a man who loves his wife's family even when they're complicated. Patrick came around the table and crouched next to my chair, which is what he does. He's always been the one who gets low, who comes to your level instead of asking you to come to his. It's one of the things I'm proudest of about him. Happy birthday, Dad, he said. Marcus, 13 and therefore obligated to find all of this embarrassing, was looking at the ceiling with spectacular focus. The twins had gone very still with the wide-eyed seriousness of children who understand that something real is happening. I looked at all of them. My table, my family. All right, I said. I cleared my throat. Now, I had Cosima prepare something specific for tonight, and if we don't eat it at the correct temperature, I will genuinely never forgive any of you. Marcus's head came down from the ceiling. What is it? Lamb shoulder, I said. Your great-grandmother's recipe. I haven't put it on the menu in 20 years because I was saving it. I looked around the table. I thought tonight was a reasonable occasion. The door opened and Cosima's team began to bring in the courses, the bisque first. The bread I knew she'd made from scratch that afternoon, the wine Theo had chosen, the whole architecture of a dinner assembled for the people I loved. The room filled with steam and candlelight, and the sound of my grandchildren arguing pleasantly about who got the end piece of bread. I sat at the head of the table. I was home. Later, after the lamb, which made Elena close her eyes and say that's her, that's exactly her, and after the birthday cake, which the grandchildren had helped Renata make from a recipe they'd found in Sandra's handwriting on an index card. After all of it, Patrick poured the last of the Barolo and raised his glass. To Dad, he said, who built something that outlasts all of us. To Daniel, Elena said. To Grandpa, said Marcus, with a solemnity that made everyone laugh, including Marcus. I raised my glass. The candles were burning low. Somewhere beyond the door, my kitchen was finishing its Saturday service, Cosima calling out tickets, the line moving with the efficiency I had spent decades learning how to build, the sounds of something working the way it was supposed to. I thought of my mother. I thought of Sandra. I drank my wine. Next year, I said, you put my name on the reservation. Renata reached across the table and took my hand. Front of the list, she said, always. I looked at my daughter, my son, my sister, my grandchildren, the people who had stumbled toward me imperfectly and found me at the head of my own table. Good, I said, now let's see if there's more of that bread. Some things you build with your hands, some things you build with time. The luckiest of us build both and live long enough to sit down inside them.